couple of respected writers, Tom Pelissero and Bob McGinn, put out their anonymous scout reports on the quarterbacks last weekend, on Friday, actually. And these two guys are respected. Like, they're not fabricating these things. But you always have to take all of these anonymous quotes with a huge, huge, huge grain of salt because, one, I would say 25% of scouts and executives are known idiots. Two, sometimes they're just trying to say negative things about a guy to get him to fall. Ethically dicey, depending on what they're saying. And three, sometimes they're just really informed. And I think you find a pretty good combination of these here. I'm going to start with Bob McGinn because he's the oldest and crustiest of these writers, and also tends to have I think he has older and crustier scouts, most importantly. So those guys have the crustiest things to say. Okay, showed up at the combine, noticeably puffed up. This is Bob McGinn himself speaking. Some theorize he altered his dietary regimen before drinking an excessive amount of water and weighed 204, declined to step on the scale at pro day. According to one scout, he was 169. What the hell? 169 in January of 2022 when the Crimson Tide beat Georgia in the BCS title game. I wonder how much of the strategy of these guys was to just get the 200 something out into public's mindset, knowing that scouts all along are going to know that he's 190 or less, but hitting that 204 at the combine. Like, I look at the combine measurements like they're the standard, even though they screw up the combine measurements at times. So in my mind, like, if I'm a team that's drafting Bryce Young, it makes me a little bit less skeptical, and I'm not as worried about it. I don't know. 169 is light, man. And yet fewer and fewer guys seem to be worried about it. The next quote, this was the good one. He's the biggest outlier in the history of the position. He looked like a pregnant lady at the weigh-in. I would say he's 5'10", 180. And I'm going to tell you how I know this is an old guy. For one, he compared him to a pregnant lady. This is like Nolan Naraki territory. I thought about Fran Tarkenton, and this is how you know he's old. If it was sprinter football, he would be the first pick 100 times. Sprint football or sprinter football, whatever they call it. It's lightweight football, and I don't know how many places even have it anymore. I know at Cornell they had it because a few Ivy League schools, Navy, Army, I think Air Force. It's football with a weight limit, and it's really fun to watch because the offensive and defensive linemen aren't that much bigger than the running backs, and so it looks fast as hell. It's like a whole different pace of football. But Bryce Young's not going to be making any money playing sprint football. He's going to make money like he did in the SEC legally. It's legal now, and in the NFL, as long as he keeps his kidneys intact. They say he only got hurt one time at Bama. This is a grumpy old guy, but it took him a month to get over it. Sprained right AC joint. Even though he missed just one game, he wasn't the same guy for a month. I may be proven completely wrong, but I would be scared to death to take him. I'd be scared too. I'm going to be honest with you. I think a lot of us are trying to act like I'm no dinosaur. I got no issues with his size. 169 scares the hell out of me, but I think he's going to go, obviously. All right. He breaks the mold of what I look for, a fifth scout said. This is all from Bob McGinn still. I'll link the Tyler Dunn newsletter that these come from. Tyler Dunn has his own newsletter and blog and all that stuff. Does a really good job. But this is Bob McGinn writing for Tyler Dunn. He breaks the mold of what I look for. It's hard for me to live with that size. I see it in Tua, but what has he done? I second that. I saw Tua versus the Texans. The Texans broke Tua. Tua got benched in the second half because his coach, Mike McDaniel, boy genius, kept throwing the ball for God knows what reason when they were up by 3 scores already. And he was a mess after that. He completed like 50% of his passes until he got that concussion. It was bad after that. So good job, Lovie Smith. Wilson was bigger and smarter. Oh, Russell Wilson. This kid's got enough arm, but he's not as well built as you'd like. He looks like a high school kid. Yeah, I agree. I agree with all that. Maybe the Panthers have this crusty old scout on their squad. Maybe this is Josh McCown. Let's see. He's not as good an athlete as Kyler Murray, but I think he's a better person and has better focus. What the hell? It's not Kyler Murray taking strays here. 4 years later. Okay, better person. All right, whatever that means. Let's think about it in a football context. Better focus. I don't think there will ever be a time when you read about Bryce Young having a clause in his contract about having to watch extra film outside of the facility. There are all kinds of stories about Bryce Young showing up on Sundays, like absorbing the game plan already. So I don't think that's going to happen. Let's see. What's your gut saying right now, Seth? Who do you think the Texans draft? There might be a lot of boos at the draft party. I know. I don't know what to think about this Will Levis stuff. Will Levis right now, for those of you who don't know, is the odds-on favorite to be the Texans pick at number 2 overall. I've already started the bargaining process in my brain. I did another video this morning that you can check out to see how I'm starting to cope with that a little bit, because I am very, very, very skeptical of Will Levis. But back to Bryce Young. As far as Bryce Young not being as good an athlete as Kyler Murray, I do think that's one of the under-discussed things. And I know I've talked to you guys about this a little bit, but he's not running away from the better athletes in the SEC. So remember, in the SEC, yes, you've got some guys that'll be in the NFL, but the vast majority of those guys won't be in the NFL. So some of the improvisational stuff that you see from Bryce Young, it's not going to be quite on the same level. I think he's fine because he knows how to move within the pocket, but it's like you got to tone it down a little bit. Kind of like when, remember when Johnny Manziel got to the NFL and you realize like, oh gosh, I guess it's a lot different running away from these guys than it is running away from Air Force or what have you. Let's see. So this is from Tom Pelissero now. Change the font. He could be an offensive coordinator right now, said a third NFC executive. He's that calm, that mature, that's special. And I realize I didn't answer that last question. I'll get to that in a second. I think the calm and mature part is one thing that obviously guys really like. I think that without delving too much into the it factor, I think Bryce Young's the only guy out of those 4, none of whom really are like, this is not a class where people are saying, wow, yeah, this is the go-to guy any year, every year. But mostly just with Bryce Young, it's because of his size. And if it weren't for that, I don't think obviously they'd be. That's nothing earth-shattering to say. If you're going for the best combination of route anticipation and accuracy, you're going Bryce Young, but then also knowing you're not going to do a lot of read option QB runs with him, and you're going to be willing to manipulate the pocket. That's important because I think, yes, he can run, but as we just discussed, he's not an incredible athlete. And if he weighs 169 pounds, you obviously don't want him running up in there on a whole bunch of, Lamar Jackson type designed runs or Josh Allen, God forbid. Like, at least Lamar generally avoids too much contact. Josh Allen just takes it all. And he can sustain it, well, maybe for a while. He's big. I think when you talk about manipulating the pocket, he's probably talking here about play action, bootleg, sprint option, those types of things, which I think Bryce Young will be really good at. It would fit very well in a Kubshanistani system. If the Panthers just want to go ahead and draft CJ Stroud, we'll make do with little Bryce Young. Let's see. He's got the best combination of accuracy and anticipation. You're just getting it in a 5'10" frame. He's not Kyler, where he's super twitched and elusive. He's an outlier where he's going to take shots because he's not an elusive runner. So that off-schedule stuff, he's going to take contact. What does that look like over a 17-game season? That's what I'd like to know. And as many people have discussed, they are so strict in the NFL right now. I think that might be the biggest thing that's changed even between now and when Kyler Murray was drafted. And Kyler's a lot thicker than Bryce Young, but they're super, super. I mean, and they have been for 10 years now. But this last year, when they've just started flagging guys for even like landing on a quarterback as they're trying desperately not to land on him. I know the 169. Listen. BNB Chirac vet. Iraq vet. Okay. That's what the supposed one scout said, that he finished the season at 169 a couple years ago. I don't think that's what he's going to play in the NFL. I think one thing, just by simple maturity, he'll be at least 173 by the end of the season. Let's see. This guy who can just play, the guy who can just play is Bryce Young. Is he going to be 185? He's such a good processor and thinker and accurate. It probably works. They're taking him. Just write it in. I would bet my house. God, this guy's going to bet his house. Okay. Oh, I was supposed to be judging these as to be either informed, idiotic, or smoke. This guy seemingly is informed enough, but he's just throwing it out there. He's probably not a top. He's not one of the top guys. The 169. Yeah, I would say. I think that feels like it's injurious. I feel like somebody's throwing that out there just to try to maybe somebody that's in the top 10. Maybe it just feels like a Josh McDaniels type of move. That yeah, he's 169. I hear that's what he was at the end of that Alabama game. I know. Bill O'Brien. Yeah. Let's see. Bryce is super talented, good arm talent. Probably of all of them, seems to be the most groomed to play quarterback. He's a super smart dude. Almost feels like talking to a coach at times. Bryce has obviously got the size issues that can become really real when it comes to the guys that are going to be in front of you, being able to withstand contact and having to manufacture ways to change your arm angle, get a window. Okay, arm angle is an interesting one because he's got an over-the-top delivery. Never mind my over-the-top delivery. I can't throw a lick. But he can change his arm angle, I think. And that's one thing that he's been able to do. He's been very accurate over the middle. He's been very accurate over the middle. If you look at how he was at Alabama. Yes, they're bigger in the NFL. I don't like it when people say, hey, they're big in the SEC. They're not. They're not as big as the NFL. They just aren't. The guys who are as big as the NFL, the ones who aren't going on to be NFL studs, they're fat. So a good portion of the guys, a certain chunk of guys in the SEC are going to go on to the NFL, but you don't see the same guys week in and week out. Let's see. Oh, that guy said when you watch tape, it doesn't show up how short he is. But again, I think he's shown on tape enough that he knows how to handle the height issues. Although there's one thing is when he drops back, he takes like a modified Dan Fouts drop back. He stays facing the line of scrimmage the whole time so he can scan, and he's up on his tippy toes like this. And that does make it harder when you look at like a 3 or a 5 or a 7-step drop. The way it's supposed to work is 1, 2, 3, throw or hitch and throw. There's a timing and a rhythm to it that's harder for Bryce Young to really get the ball out on time by NFL standards. So if Frank Reich or Bobby Slowick is going to deal with that, like I imagine they've got a plan for that. I don't know if Bill O'Brien tried to work on it, but that's something that Nick Caserio obviously could talk to Bill O'Brien about. If Bryce was bigger, and I don't necessarily mean taller, if he just wasn't such a frail body, it'd be blowing him away. Him is the number one pick. Sorry, I got caught up with the imagery of a frail body being blown away. So blowing away, him is the number one pick. He's a natural thrower. Accuracy is easy for him. That's the difference between him and the rest. One other thing I'd say about the difference in the NFL is, a lot of times when people talk about the height issues, they talk about seeing over the offensive linemen. That's all well and good, but really it's the defensive tackles. I mean, if you think about J.J. Watt, it's that much of a difference in the geometry and the angles of like a quarterback over here. Where am I? Like a quarterback over here and a defensive lineman up here. Like when they're close together, it becomes like, you can't see over it. In short, this isn't like some wacky theory. Short quarterbacks themselves tell you about this. They've got to figure out how to move into lanes and how to do all that. I think what everybody just figures is that Bryce Young has shown that ability to anticipate, understand, see all of that. I think there's one more. Let's see. Despite the concerns over his stature, his hand size is solid for a smaller QB, 9 3/4 inches. That is pretty good for a 5 foot. That's geometric. That's proportionally very big, actually. He's almost 10 inches for a guy that's 5'10" and 1/8. One NFC quarterbacks coach praised Young's accuracy. You haven't seen that coming out of the draft in a long time. Young also scored off the charts on the S2 cognition test that some teams use to measure players' ability to process information. Now, we all know about the S2 cognition test. There's the original deal there. I guess that would be the one other big thing to talk about, the S2 cognition test, where on Friday, Bob McGinn was the one who actually leaked the scores, the official scores, and Bryce Young scored in the 98th percentile. CJ Stroud scored a very, very low in the 18th percentile. The thing to remember about Bryce Young's score is that, yes, that's good, but there have been other quarterbacks who have scored high who didn't perform well in the NFL. So it's not like a 100% guarantee. I think the thing is, though, that people could tell that Bryce Young's processing was good on film already. This just backs it up. So Joe Burrow scored a 97. Various other guys like Justin Fields scored very high as well. It's still a story being told on him. The difference is that so far, according to the people that run the test and sell the test, nobody who's scored low has ever become a good NFL quarterback. This is the one word of caution I would make about that. They have been doing this test in the NFL combine for 7 years. So up through 2022, he's saying there hasn't been a guy who scored low who's been a good quarterback. All right, well, if we're going to judge it by successful NFL quarterbacks, I don't know exactly what criteria he's using, but there's on average maybe one good quarterback a year coming out in the draft. And it's like that's a very small sample size. So if none of the guys who had scored low were one of those, let's say 5, 6, 7, 8 quarterbacks, that's a statistically insignificant sample size. And I wouldn't be barring somebody from it. I would use it as a data point because there does seem to be a pretty good correlation, but I would use it in the same way you use a 40 time or a vertical, or just I wouldn't use it as much as college production or what I see on film, but it is something to think about. And when you diagnose those scores individually, there's like 7 or 8 different categories. You can perhaps figure out more like, okay, how do we teach to this guy? How does he absorb information? But I'm not buying it yet as far as like something that's going to bar somebody from being a good NFL player. Now, some teams, only 2 teams per division are allowed to subscribe to it. The Colts and the Titans are the 2 teams in the AFC South that subscribe to it. So there's a lot of unknowns still, like with a correlation, but I don't want to go through the whole correlation is not causation thing. I'm not buying that even the people who pay for the service are going to look at that as a death blow to CJ Stroud, because I mean, realistically, scientifically, you shouldn't. But now I'm not going to claim that all scouts and executives and football coaches have taken 3 years of stats classes or anything. I once had a coach tell me that a team was 75% run in a certain formation and down and distance, and that team had been in that down and distance and formation situation 4 times. So they could very well have been 25% leading up to that, but we were like basing our game plan around it. So it's the idea of like sample size and statistical significance. I don't know. It's a lost conversation with at least 25% of these idiotic scouts that we were talking about. I would say about 25% of those comments were for flack purposes. I'm gonna try to grab you guys a little. I'm trying to keep these things shorter, guys, by request of just about everybody, because I like to ramble on and you guys make really good comments. The Panthers fan base is selling a Bryce Young jersey. I know. Young throws to open people. He doesn't throw people open often. Okay, boy, you could get into this argument a lot about whether he's throwing to open people or, CJ Stroud. I think people unfairly say that that's all he does. I think it's just a matter of, frequency. Like CJ Stroud doesn't have to throw into tight windows as often, but he has shown definitely an ability to do it. Likewise, okay, yeah, Bryce Young isn't going to have to throw into tight windows as often as Will Levis. But I think what people are concerned about with Will Levis more than anything are the times when he's got wide open throws or wide open opportunities, either turning them down or what not. Oh, and that would be another one. As far as the S2 goes, as far as the S2 cognition test goes, we're supposed to see how well you visually process things and react to them. I think Will Levis could be that classic guy that's a little too smart for his own good, because there's times where it looks like he's just second guessing himself or uncertain what to. He looks like I do when I'm driving in a rental car away from the rental car facility in an unfamiliar city, where you're trying to figure out whether you're supposed to turn left or right. You're listening to the GPS and you're trying to see if your lights are actually on at the same time. Very dangerous place to be. Very dangerous place to be. And yet I feel like that's the world in which Will Levis lives. So if I said Bryce Young at any point in there where I meant Will Levis, you guys are smart. You do the thing. You guys scored great on your S2 cog.